Hey guys, it's Krista Watson here from Christa Quilts, and I'm excited to be back with you for another fun chat. As you remember, last time we were together, I told you all about the story of how I wrote my first book, Machine Quilting with Style. Well, now I'm back to continue that story and tell you how I wrote the next book after that, called The Ultimate Guide to Machine Quilting, with none other than the wonderful Angela Walters. But before we get into that story, let me give you kind of a real-time update about what's been happening in my studio. So recently I launched my brand new sewing table called the Christa Cabinet, which is the one that you see here. This is the cabinet or the sewing table that I work on, and I've made all my quilts since last October when I first got the first prototype. Well, I'm really excited about how well it's been received. Everybody loves it, dealers are starting to carry it, and it's starting to ship now all over the US. I couldn't be more thrilled. So the whole reason I designed this cabinet is because it filled a need in my sewing room. Well, I'm happy to say it's filling a need in yours too. I've shared a lot of pictures and videos on social media, on my blog, pretty much wherever you can find Christa Quilts content. Say that a couple times fast. But if you've missed the big announcement about it, you can go ahead and click the link in the description box below, and I'll be happy to email you information about the specs, the pricing, all the good things if you want to get one for yourself. You can also pick one up from your nearest Aero dealer, so make sure to contact them. Now, the only tricky thing is it's easy to ship to the US, but very difficult overseas. So if you're in another country and you're still my quilty friend, make sure you contact your nearest sewing machine dealer and see how you can get a hold of one. So the other projects I've been working on behind the scenes are putting some finishing touches on patterns and quilts for my next fabric line that's coming out later this year called Stitchy. I'm actually quilting on it. You can see a little sneak peek. It's the current project I'm working on right now. This quilt right here is going to end up being a free pattern once the fabric line comes out. And of course, I'll have a video and show you how to make it like I always do. So wait for that. That's going to come out soon. If you want a sneak peek of Stitchy, you can check out the little graphics that I've made for my weekly videos. Those backgrounds are a couple of the prints included in the line. Right now it's springtime in Las Vegas, and I am getting ready for summer and fall trade shows later this year. So I'm going to be attending one called Bernina University, which is just for dealers that carry Bernina products. And I'm also going to be attending International Quilt Market later in the fall. Now, the consumer side of that is called International Quilt Festival, and I will be there teaching, but right now the samples I'm making are more of for the trade, the wholesale, quilt shop owners that want to purchase my products so then they can carry them in their shops for you guys. So Bernina University, like I mentioned, is just for dealers who carry sewing machine products. But there's also vendors who are there, like me. I'll be showing my latest fabric, my latest patterns, so that the shops can carry them in their shops. You can see a little sneak peek of my booth the last time we were there in person, all the way back in 2019. What's crazy to me is realizing that the quilts you can see here in my booth, those were from my fabric lines that came out several years ago. Abstract Garden, which was my third collection, and Geopop, which was my fourth. The one that I'm working on now, Stitchy, is already fabric line number 8. I don't know where the time goes. And what's really cool about the show, Bernina University, it's also for Bernina's sister companies, Benartex, that's the company I designed for, and Brewer, which is a wholesale notions company. In fact, here's another sneak peek. I'm actually currently designing a line of notions that will also be introduced at Bernina University. So even though you guys may not necessarily get to see everything that's happening there, I'll share pictures, videos, all the fun things. I'll have a complete wrap up, and then once it gets into the dealer's hands, you'll start seeing it in your local quilt shops. So that's kind of exciting. So now that you know what's going on in my quilty world, let's get into the main topic of today's conversation. I'm going to share with you a virtual trunk show of all the quilts from the Ultimate Guide to Machine Quilting. Back in 2013, which was a pivotal time for me when I attended QuiltCon, and I came home and I decided I'm going to write books, I'm going to travel, I'm going to do all the things. That's where I met Angela. At the time that I decided that I was ready to pursue these interests, for some reason I had it in my head that I needed to be a long arm quilter if I was going to be taken seriously, write books about machine quilting, and travel the world teaching what I knew. So I spent several months going to a bunch of different shows and taking long arm quilting classes from the best in the business. Angela was one of those that I met at QuiltCon in 2013, and she was amazing and inspiring, and we bonded over machine quilting and we became fast friends. However, after taking Angela's class and so many other amazing teachers, you know what they helped me realize? I am not a long arm quilter. You could have hit me with a ton of bricks, but it was such a good realization to understand what you like and what you don't like. They're both equally important. For whatever reason, quilting with a long arm to me kind of feels like driving a tank. It's not very comfortable. I don't like having to roll the quilt on the frames. I get it. Other people love it, and it could just be operator error. I will totally cop up to that. But for whatever reason, it just didn't click with me. It just didn't feel comfortable. Not as comfortable as what I've been doing for the last 20 or so years, which is domestic machine quilting. But I wouldn't have known that until I actually gave it a try. So I always tell people when they come and they take my domestic classes, you know what? At the end of class, if you don't like it, that's okay. We'll still be friends. At least you know. And that's one of the beautiful things that I absolutely love about working in this quilting industry. There's truly something for everyone. So fast forward a couple years past QuiltCon, my first book, Machine Quilting with Style, was just about ready to go to print. Well, the publisher was so pleased with the work I had done on that book that they came to me this time with an idea. First, I went to them for my first book, and they came to me for my second book. They had the idea to write a book based on two well-known quilters, a long-arm quilter and a sit-down quilter. So they asked Angela, she said yes, and then they came to me. Now, I was very flattered because at the time I wasn't necessarily a well-known quilter, but I guess they saw potential in me. So they asked me right away if I would be willing to write this book with Angela, and it took me about 2 seconds to say yes. I mean, after all, who wouldn't want to pair up with one of the most amazing quilters out there? So it took us about a solid year. We wrote the book, we presented it to Quilt Market, and it was a smashing success. Because no one had ever really taken the concept before of showing two different ways to quilt the same quilt, one with a long arm machine and one with a sit-down machine. And now what's really been funny is since the book has come out, there have been a lot more quilters out there that I call quilting ambidextrous, those that go back and forth between long arm quilting and domestic machine quilting. Again, I had it in my head that you were either one or the other, but there's a lot of people that do both. So our book has been well received because you can learn something from Angela and you can also learn something from me, and you can kind of take and choose whichever one is going to work for you. For example, if you want to learn how to machine quilt swirls, you can try Angela's swirls, or you can try Christa's swirls, or you can mix it up and do a combination of both. It really works for everyone. And I have to tell you, Angela was super fun to write a book with. She was so easy and laid back. I'm a little more nitpicky, maybe a little bit more type A personality, so whenever I had an idea or a suggestion or I wanted to change things, I would send her an email or a phone call and I'd say, hey Angela, what about this or what about that? And every time the answer was, sure, no problem, whatever you like. She was really easy to work with and I loved it. So the year that Angela Walters was the keynote speaker at QuiltCon, we decided that would be a great opportunity to have some publicity, do a fun little meet and greet, and do a book signing there at the show. So while we were at the show, another really fun story happened. We were at a vendor who carried my book, Angela's books, and our book together. And you know what else? They also carried a book that Tula Pink and Angela Walters had written about the same time as the book that Angela and I had written. I joke with Tula later on and I say, hey, we're both authors-in-law since we both wrote a book with Angela. So she happened to be at the show, saw that we were doing a book signing, and she came on over and started hanging out with us. Well, before we knew it, it turned into a triple book signing. Angela and Tula and Christa all in the same booth. Everyone that stopped by the show loved it. The quilt shop who was vending at the show loved it because they sold out completely out of all three of our books. What was really fun about this book, working with Angela Walters, is that we each made the same 10 quilts, but we made them with different fabrics and different quilting designs. So it's a total of 20 quilts and over 50 different designs. We both have the same quilting philosophy. She agrees that finished is better than perfect, and I always pride myself on being a perfectly imperfect quilter. Okay, that was a really long introduction, and I hope you enjoyed it. Now I'm ready to show you my virtual trunk show of quilts from the Ultimate Guide to Machine Quilting. Let's start off by showing you the first quilt of the book called Plum Lines. I'll show you these quilts in order, and I'll show you a lot of the details about the machine quilting. I really love the ultra modern vibe of this quilt, and I was thrilled when it won a ribbon at a regional quilt show. For the quilting, I explored my idea of geometric chains in different areas of the quilt with the blending threads. In Angela's version, she chose a different color palette and also different quilting motifs in each of the different fabric areas. So we are both custom quilting, but with two different approaches in how we maneuver the quilt under the machine. For the next pattern, called Choosing Colors, I selected a rainbow of bright solid fabrics to form my pieced paintbrushes. This was where I discovered how to quilt one of my favorite designs called switchbacks over a large surface area. The trick is to quilt one pass of the design in one rectangle going in one direction, then you drop down into the next rectangle and continue the pattern going in the opposite direction. For Angela's version of Choosing Colors, she picked a more muted color palette and switched things up by quilting a different set of lines in each of the paintbrushes. So my motifs run horizontal and hers run vertically. It's two different ideas, but they both work great, and you can even mix and match them if you wanted to. The next quilt, Directionally Challenged, is foundation paper pieced, and it's a great pattern to practice those skills. For my version, I wanted to show how to combine wavy lines and straight lines in the same quilt, and then I used a walking foot to quilt both motifs. I combined them with zigzags in the background areas, and I didn't do any marking. I just quilted it random and irregular, and I eyeballed it. I took Angela's mantra to heart: finished is better than perfect. In Angela's bright red version, she free motion quilted a couple of different designs, alternating from straight lines to curvy lines with a few subtle variations. And her designs aren't fully marked either. She shows you how to quilt from dot to form each motif. You just kind of aim for the center or aim for the edge, and close enough is good enough. This next quilt, called Swirling Butterflies, was a challenge to quilt, but so much fun. I marked out the entire design with a chalk pencil and a light box to follow the pattern that we include in the book. Here are some of my in-progress shots as I quilted it with the turquoise thread. You can see my registration lines that I drew to help line everything up. I quilted all of the black background space with the design I call Improv Machine Quilting. You basically mash up all of your favorite free motion motifs at once, and then you quilt them randomly throughout. It's a great way to keep yourself from getting bored. Angela's version of Swirling Butterflies is fabulous. She quilted a traditional whole cloth white on white quilt with just a subtle hint of color in the thread. She threw in her signature swirls to frame the border around the edges, and it's absolutely stunning, don't you think? Fractured Squares is the next quilt in the book, and it's a really fun improv design that's built with a center rectangle and surrounded by pieced borders. The fun part about this design is you get to decide where exactly you want your borders to change fabrics, and you can place them wherever you want throughout the quilt. I quilted my version entirely with the walking foot, and it was fun to come up with different ideas of what you can make from a simple straight line. Angela quilted her fabulous chevrons with highly contrasting thread, which really makes an impact. She combined it with other motifs that really play up the geometry of this design, and again, she used her dot to dot, where you kind of aim for one side of the border and then you go back the other way, not worrying about perfection. Quatrefoil applique can be made using machine applique or traditional hand applique. In my version, I chose pretty pink solids in a variety of values, and I quilted them all with the same color thread. I call it my machine quilting sampler because I quilted a different texture in each of the quatrefoil petals. You can really see how the thread shows up or blends in depending on the color of the fabric relative to the color of the thread. I added dense texture with pebble quilting in the background with a blending gray thread to finish it off. For her version, Angela chose a more neutral palette, and she highlighted the design with pops of shimmery copper or gold fabric. She added interest in each petal with echoed lines, occasionally filling them in with a few pebbles to break up the monotony. So again, you're going to see us using some of the same motifs in our quilts, but we're going to use them in dramatically different ways. The next quilt, Cornered, was really fun to make in piece. It's a quick little wall hanging that comes together so that you can get to the fun part, which is the machine quilting. I quilted a variety of motifs, a different design and thread color for each fabric in the quilt. I included continuous curves, a large floral spiral, and some really fun background textures. My other tip is to use busy fabric prints when you want to hide your quilting, or solids when you really want the machine quilting to shine. For Angela's green version, she incorporated more of her dot-to-dot techniques to change things up, plus some more fun textures. She quilted her signature swirls in this quilt, while I quilted swirls in another quilt, and so it's fun to see how we both approach the same design in a slightly different way. This next quilt, Exploding Star, was rather large, and so I decided to quilt it with overlapping continuous spirals. I quilted it with my walking foot, and this is the one design in the book that you really can only do using a domestic machine. Angela quilted her version completely differently with a combination of swirls and straight lines. She echoed the seams wherever she could to provide more contrast in the quilting and to break up the motifs a little bit. And it allows the unquilted areas to poof up, providing more dimension in the quilt. The next quilt is called U-turns, and it's another interesting modern design that creates a whole composition rather than being block-based. It provides a great backdrop to practice switching directions while quilting borders or sashing. In my version, I actually paid homage to Angela by using one of her earlier designer prints, and it was really fun to practice quilting around the swirls. And I even show 2 different ways to turn the corner on a border. It's all about anticipating where you'll stitch next, and having options makes the job so much easier. In Angela's version, she chose a purple palette to feature some of her go-to designs like wishbones and ribbon candy. She also gives you lots of options for dealing with the corners in your designs. I know that part can be tricky, so by following along in this chapter, you'll be a pro in no time. Migration was a really fun quilt to quilt because of all the negative space. I chose a palette that reads more rustic with those warm earth tones. First, I stitched in the ditch and then echoed every ditch to anchor or secure the quilt and give it a bit of an embossed texture. Then I filled in the rectangles with a contrasting combination of free motion square spirals and overlapping wavy lines. In Angela's icy blue version, she played up the modern geometry by echoing the inside of the main rectangles to make them look like faceted jewels. Isn't this clever? She broke up the expansive negative space with wavy brackets and then filled in the smaller sections with more of her favorite free motion designs. Well, I sure hope you enjoyed looking at these quilts and are inspired. Most of us that are in the industry that do these things, share these videos, write these books, teach these classes, we all do it for one reason. We want you guys to have as much fun quilting as we do. Just remember, you can play around with all of the piece designs, and you can mix and match the machine quilting designs as well. Now, as of this filming, this book is out of print. However, I still have a few remaining copies left while supplies last. So if you want to head over to shop.christaquilts.com, you can be part of my quilting story, and I'll be happy to sign a book for you. After all, I want to be your best quilty friend and help you have success when it comes to quilting. Until next time, happy quilting.